Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. I have 4 articles in this episode for you, and the URLs are in the description of the video for your convenience. The first one I have here is off of Oregon Live, and it says, Case expected to go to jury this week in second Oregon standoff trial. None of the 4 defendants in the second trial of Oregon refuge occupiers are gung-ho to take the witness stand, a big change from the first trial. That decision has helped move this trial along at a much faster clip. Closing arguments are tentatively set for Tuesday, the 9th day of the trial, so the case could go to the jury early this week. In the first case, 4 of the 7 defendants took the stand to explain to jurors themselves why they went to Malheur National Wildlife Refuge last winter. With the federal conspiracy charge and a possible sentence of up to 6 years resting on what the defendants' intent was when occupying the refuge, their testimony played a key role in the case. This time, the defendants have relied on the testimony offered by others. Jake Ryan's mother, Burns resident who met Jason Patrick at the refuge, Dwayne Emmer's acquaintance in Irgon, where he lives, to say what the men told them about their reasons for going to the refuge. They're also relying on the occupation leader Ammon Bundy's testimony from last week, when he again explained his motive in seizing the refuge with an armed contingent of followers on January the 2nd of 2016. Defense attorneys also have introduced social media posts, recorded phone messages, and videotaped statements defendants made from the refuge that have the 4 men describe in their own words why they came. I heard someone took over the refuge and I wanted to get the real story, Emmer said in an interview with independent broadcaster Pete Santilli. Emmer said he found no maniacs running around with guns. I went and they tried to feed me. Nice bunch of people, Emmer said. They just need a solution to this problem. Have worked to undercut the prosecution's arguments that there was an agreement among occupiers and they intended to prevent members of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or U.S. Bureau of Land Management from carrying out their work at the refuge through intimidation, threat, or force. Ryan's mother, Roxana Ryan, for example, said her son was inspired by YouTube videos of Bundy and the occupation spokesman Robert Lavoy Finicum. Their message about limited government hit a chord, she said. A man who rented a building to Emmer for his welding business said Emmer told him he went to the refuge because of the treatment of the Hammond family. Father and son ranchers Dwight Hammond Jr. and Stephen Hammond, whose family property abuts the refuge. They were sent back to prison to serve out 5-year sentence for setting fire to public land. A woman who met Patrick at the refuge says he just wanted people to read the Constitution and know it for themselves. Darrell Thorne's lawyer pointed out when questioning Bundy that Bundy hardly knew Thorne. Bundy may have shaken his hand at dinner on the refuge. Bundy testified that he went to the refuge not thinking of the refuge employees, but intent on shining light on the federal government making the rural community a guest in their own lands. He also spoke of the plan to stake a claim to the property through the principle of adverse possession. He was acquitted along with his brother Ryan Bundy and 5 others in the first trial that lasted 5 weeks last fall, but still faces prosecution in Nevada in 2014 confrontation with federal land agents outside his father's ranch. Patrick was to decide this weekend whether to testify, but lawyers for his 3 co-defendants said it's unlikely they will. The decision whether to put a defendant on the stand is always one of the most difficult decisions for a lawyer to make, said Kevin Sally, a criminal defense lawyer not associated with the case. Defense lawyers typically don't want to expose their client to a blistering cross-examination, Sally said, which particularly for an untrained witness can do more harm than good. Defendants with a criminal record also could have their testimony quickly impeached by a prosecutor who could introduce their earlier convictions, he said. Legal observers point out it's the government's, not the defendant's, burden to prove a defendant intent at the time of the alleged offense. Other differences in the second Oregon standoff trial include shorter cross-examinations by defense attorneys, streamlined testimonies offered by both sides, and fewer drawn-out legal arguments between prosecutors and defense lawyers. The defense team this time also doesn't have anyone quite like Ammon Bundy's lawyer, Marcus Mumford, who seemed to irritate the judge throughout the last trial. Mumford would ask the same questions repeatedly and often object to the prosecution's evidence. And only one of the four defendants in this case representing himself, Jason Patrick, but he's allowed to stand by, he's allowed his standby lawyer to address jurors, question witness legal arguments. In the first trial, three defendants represented themselves. Still, U.S. District Judge Anna J. Brown has expressed frustrations with the pace of the case, admonishing prosecutors one day for not having enough witnesses lined up and doing the same when the defense did the same thing. You need to plan to fill this afternoon, the judge told defense lawyers. This is your chance to put on your case, so get going. Brown has prodded each side not to waste the jury's time. Defense lawyers have found themselves in a catch-22, criticized for not having witnesses ready to call, often after the judge has eliminated many from their pool to avoid repetition. The judge has been aggressive in this trial about restricting the defense from calling multiple witnesses who would offer the same testimony, what's called cumulative testimony. Brown made it clear, for instance, that she wouldn't allow what happened in the first trial when multiple defense witnesses described again and again how neat and tidy the refuge was kept during the occupation. We're making many trials out of who's cooking dinner and who's stocking shelves, Brown told defense lawyers last week after some of their witnesses described how they went to the refuge to help out in the kitchen. These collateral acts about how defendants were trying to get things done is not material as whether or not there was conspiracy to impede. On Thursday, for example, the defense team had 18 witnesses lined up, but the list was whittled to just 8 people to testify after the judge eliminated many as cumulative, saying there's already enough witnesses to testify about the atmosphere on the refuge during the occupation, and she wouldn't allow more. Defense lawyers, clearly frustrated, also voluntarily cut out witnesses given to the judge direction. In the case of a possible appeal, the defense lawyers alerted the judge to some witnesses they believed were excluded unfairly. The judge won't let the truth get to the jury, Emmer posted on his Facebook page. They won't let us have but a small fraction of the testimony. Judges have wide discretion in determining which witnesses and how many can testify, Sally said. It's not unusual for judges to adapt and take different approach in the second phase of a trial based on what happened in the first, he added. Another ruling that didn't go the defense team's way came when the judge ruled that prosecutors could recall a couple of refuge employees to the stand during rebuttal this week to challenge testimony from Ammon Bundy and others that anyone was welcome to come to the refuge during the armed occupation. Knight said such testimony opens the door for prosecutors to ask refuge employees if they felt welcome or feared returning to the refuge while occupiers remained, something prosecutors felt restricted from asking during the first trial when the judge said workers couldn't talk about their subjective fears in direct testimony. Contending that the government can't rely on statements that prosecutors elicited from witnesses during cross-examination to introduce evidence they were restricted from presenting in their case in chief. During cross-examination, Knight showed a photo of Bundy standing in front of a large group of occupiers gathered in the firehouse at the refuge and asked if employees could have worked there during the takeover. They could have come if they wanted to, Bundy said. It's your testimony the employees weren't, it's your testimony that the employees were welcome to come in if they wanted to? Knight asked. Absolutely, Bundy said. Thank you, Knight responded. During cross-examination of acquitted occupier Ken Menenbach, Knight asked if it was true that the refuge workers couldn't go to work during the occupation. They can go to work for Harney County Resource Center, said Menenbach, referring to the new name that the protesters gave the refuge. They could have come down and worked, sure, anytime. Brown ruled that testimony like that opened the door for prosecutors to recall refuge workers. This door has been flung open. It hasn't just been cracked, the judge said. The prosecutors had the opportunity in the first trial. They didn't use it. The next article I have is off of BizPac Review. NFL, take note. U.S. Soccer announces new policy for players who think it's cool to disrespect America. U.S. Soccer is nipping this taking a knee during a national anthem nonsense in the bud. The association announced a new policy that will require all players, coaches, and other personnel on its national teams to stand respectfully at each game's opening as the Star Spangled Banner is performed. This decision came in response to player Megan Rapinoe having taken a knee last fall at a U.S. women's match. Immediately after that incident, U.S. Soccer released a statement that said, "We have an expectation that our players and coaches will stand and honor the flag while the national anthem is played." But that expectation wasn't made mandatory until recently when the organization added a new policy to its bylaws. All persons representing a federation national team shall stand respectfully during the playing of national anthems at every event in which the federation represents, the new policy reads. Fox Sports soccer analyst Stuart Holden reported in a tweet, says new policy added to U.S. soccer bylaws, players shall stand respectfully during playing of national anthem at which federation is represented. Although the rule was approved by the U.S. Soccer Board of Directors early last month, it wasn't announced until Saturday at the organization's national general meeting. U.S. coach Jill Ellis said Saturday that she agreed with Federation's new policy. "I've always felt that should be what we do to honor the country and have the pride of putting on a national team jersey," she said, according to the New York Daily News. "I said that previously. I think that should be the expectation. That's our workplace out there, and we should represent ourselves and our country," Ellis said. The new policy is silent on the issue of punishment for infractions of the new policy. Federation President Sunil Guttil said they will address that if and when the violation occurs, Fox Sports reported. Attorney, author, and marathon runner Dan Rauschenberg, I'm not sure how his last name's pronounced, observed on the issue, and he put a tweet out that says, U.S. Soccer, I can guarantee that any penalty for not doing so would be far outweighed by the benefits and exposure. The practice of refusing to stand for the national anthem was initiated by then San Francisco 49er quarterback Colin Kaepernick and was soon picked up by the NFL players as possible result. Ratings for games tanked throughout the season, as well they should have. The next article that I have for you is off of, what is it off of? Let's see. DuluthNewsTribune.com. And this is one of those where I cannot make this stuff up. Good golly almighty. Mailman delivering package to Minnesota. Bestiality charge. Holy smoke. A Polk County mailman faces felony charge after prosecutors say he broke into a customer's garage and engaged in a sexual act with a dog. Brian Lewis George L. Chapman, age 21, has been charged with one count of second-degree burglary, a felony, and one count of bestiality, a misdemeanor for acts alleged to have taken place on February the 6th. According to a criminal complaint, a Polk County man noticed the mailman was spending a long time in his garage to drop off a package. When the man reviewed the surveillance camera in his garage, he observed that the mailman engaged in a sexual act with his dog about 1:30 p.m. on February the 6th. A Polk County Sheriff deputy also reviewed the footage and observed the mailman enter with a package, place the package down, and then engage in a sexual act with a dog, which was staying in the garage. The U.S. Postal Service did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Chapman's employment status. The burglary charge carries a maximum of 10-year sentence with a potential $20,000 fine. The bestiality charge is punishable by 90 days in jail or a $1,000 fine. Are you kidding me? That's all they get for that. Holy smoke. Can't make this stuff up. The next one I have here is off of, let's see, thescientist.com. And it says, Q&A, encoding a classic film, computer operating systems in DNA. And I thought this was an interesting article. It says, Yaniv Ehrlich and colleagues encoded large media files in DNA, copied the DNA multiple times, and still managed to retrieve the files without any errors. They reported in Science Today, March the 2nd, compared with cassette tapes and 8mm film, DNA is far less likely to become obsolete, and its storage density is roughly 215 petabytes of data per gram of genetic material, the researchers noted. To test DNA's media storage capabilities, Ehrlich, an assistant professor of computer science at Columbia University in New York City, and Dina Zelinsky, a senior associate scientist at the New York Genome Center, encoded 6 large files, including a French film and a computer operating system, complete with word processing software, into DNA. They then recovered the data from PCR-generated copies of that DNA. The scientists spoke with Ehrlich about the study and other potential data storage applications for DNA. The scientist says, why is DNA a good place to store information? And Ehrlich says, first, we're starting to reach the physical limits of hard drives. DNA is much more compact than magnetic media, about 1 million times more compact. Second, it can last for much longer time. Think about your CDs from the 90s. They're probably scratched by now. Today, we can read DNA from skeleton that is 4,000 years old. Third, one of the nice features about DNA is that it is not subject to digital obsoleteness. Think about video cassettes or 8mm movies. It's very hard these days to watch these movies because the hardware changes so fast. DNA, that hardware isn't going anywhere. It's been around for the last 3 billion years. If humanity loses its ability to read DNA, we have much bigger problems than data storage. And the scientist says, have other researchers tried to store information in DNA? And Ehrlich says, there are several groups that have already done this process. They inspired us, but our approach has several advantages. Ours is 60% more efficient than previous strategies, and our results are very immune to noise and error. Most previous studies reported some issues getting the data back from DNA, some gaps in the information received or retrieved, but we show it's easy. We even tried to make it harder for ourselves, so we tried to copy the data, and the enzymatic reaction involved in copying DNA introduced errors. We copied the data, and then we copied that copy, and then copied a copy of that copy 9 times. And we were still able to recover the data without one error. We also achieved a density of 215 petabytes per 1 gram of DNA. Your laptop probably has 1 terabyte. Multiply that by 200,000, and we could fit all that information into 1 gram of DNA. Scientist says, how did you and your colleagues choose what to encode in the DNA? And he says, some were just for fun. We decided to try a French movie called The Arrival of a Train, one of the first movies ever created, and now the first movie to survive PCR reactions. We encoded full computer operating systems. You could write your own article on this operating system. We also put a computer virus on the DNA. We thought it would be fun to put a computer virus on there because you usually think of regular viruses on DNA. Scientist says, in your study, you mentioned that the high fidelity of your process due to fountain codes. What exactly are these and why did you use them? And he says, we have Two challenges when you encode information on DNA. The first is that all DNA molecules are created equally. If you have a molecule with a long stretch of the same nucleotide, like AAAA, it's very hard to synthesize this molecule, replicate it. So it's not very advisable to do so. The second challenge is that not all DNA molecules are going to make it. Some in this enzymatic process are going to basically drop out of the process, and we have to still be able to recover the file. Using fountain codes is one solution to addressing these two problems. It's like a Sudoku puzzle. Instead of sending all the files directly, we send many hints about the file. We make it so easy that even if you're missing many of the hints, you still can recover the file. This is the same way in which a DNA fountain works. You don't see all of the molecules, but you can still recover the content of the file. And once you have the file, the computer can generate infinite hints about the file, like a fountain. We take each hint, map it into DNA sequence on the computer, and see whether we like the sequence or not. Does it have the properties we want from a good DNA sequence? If it doesn't, we discard it. The DNA file itself is actually many, many hints about the file. There are a few places parts of the file are actually there, like the answered cells on Sudoku grid, but most of the places have these hints about several cells on the grid. The scientist asked, how difficult was it to retrieve the files encoded in DNA? And he says it was super simple. Once we had the idea to use fountain codes, everything just fell into place. We started toward the end of May, and we had the manuscript ready by the middle of September. The scientist says, is it a realistic process? How expensive is it? And he says, right now it needs more work. Currently, it's like $7,000 for 2 megabytes of data. But here's the thing to keep in mind. The $7,000 is for DNA molecules of very good quality, because the supply chain is geared toward the synthetic biology application. But here we have all the redundancy built in. We can tolerate a much larger fraction of errors. So this suggests we can basically go and maybe produce more quick and dirty DNA that will be more erroneous but much cheaper. This way we can really lower the cost for DNA storage. And there's a clarification at the bottom of this. It says, clarification March 3rd. The headline of this article has been updated to make clearer that the researchers encoded one film and one operating system into DNA. So there you have that. If you like what I'm doing here, share it on your social media so everybody gets to hear the news, and give it a thumbs up. Don't be afraid to let me know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. That way you'll stay informed. See you in the next one.